Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. The Last Dinosaur is the podcast where you can learn about the changing landscape of the maritime space while hearing from those that are leading the charge. Today's guest is Captain Matthew Glass, who has over 20 years in the maritime industry and currently serves on the Houston Pilots Executive Committee as second officer. Captain Glass has been an active pilot on the Houston Ship Channel for 14 years. Since 1921, the Houston pilots have been piloting the port that built the city of Houston, building on 100 plus years of commitment to safety, community, education, and growing a diverse pilot workforce. The association provides piloting services to all foreign flag and American vessels entering or departing the port of Houston. Captain Glass, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Chris. Excited to be here with you today and visit and talk about all the great things going on with the pilots and down here in Houston.
Yeah, and just for everybody, just a little background, I got to meet Captain Glass earlier in the year at the Nautical Institute biannual conference down in Galveston, and we sat on a fantastic panel together, and it was kind of my idea, our idea about, hey, let's take some of what we talked about, which was, we'll get to it in a second, but it was really the idea of social media and how the pilots now have to deal with social media. And let's talk about that on the podcast. But before we get into all that, talk about a little bit about your background and what the pilots are up to. You're probably just, hanging out, not doing anything, drinking coffee, because, there's nothing ever going on in the port of Houston.
Right. It's a pretty slow place. It's been an exciting 2024 has been a busy year for us. We're going to close out the year with over 20,000 ship transits. That actually accounts for only about 10% of the total transits on the waterway. We have a lot of barge traffic as well. Kind of backing up to my background and how I got here is I grew up on the edge of Galveston Bay in a maritime family. My dream from a young age was to be a pilot. So I'm a Texas Aggie. I went to Texas Maritime Academy in Galveston and then went kind of the traditional route of working tankers, chemical tankers, and worked my way into the pilots over time. I was fortunate. I was on a chemical tanker that's kind of legendary in the American fleet, the Chemical Pioneer. It was an old steamship. She hung in there for a long time. And I'd spend months at a time in Houston, in and out of, 10, 12 docks in 1 month. And was able to get to know all the pilots, get all my pilotage, and got in here 14 years ago. Now I'm going into my third year in this position. And this position primarily is really, I support the active pilots out on the ship channel. We have a lot of focuses we're working on right now within our association and kind of with the American Pilot Association internationally, and a lot of that's adapting to kind of changing regulations aimed at meeting environmental standards, right? So CI, EEXI, EDI, and, the shift to a more fuel conscious focused engines, right? So a more economical engine that's not the same power levels we were used to, The Chemical Pioneer, when you needed power, it was open the steam valve and you got the power you needed. Now we're looking at engines that are more limited by computers and automation that protect the engine from over torquing themselves. So that changes how we pilot and how we mitigate a pilotage strategy to get a vessel into port. We're looking at wind assisted technologies now, right? So roto sails and even actual sails. So we're having conversations with different manufacturers about how do they install these, but not limit the vessel's ability to come into port. So that's big. And then in the background of all these changing technologies is the ships are getting bigger, right? Pretty close to completing in this month, next month, the first piece of Project 11, which was a $1 billion infrastructure project for the Houston Ship Channel, which is going to take us from 535 feet wide to 750 feet wide. And is going to allow us to transit two-way Neo-Panamax container ships in and out of our container ports. But that's also going to allow our oil and gas trade to move more efficiently through the night hours now that we have that higher safety margin factor of the wider channel. And that was all done in collaboration with our industry partners and our great port infrastructure team down here in Houston. So every now and then we stop and drink a cup of coffee, but we're pretty busy right now.
So that widening of the channel, well, we still going to have Texas chicken down there where the ships do that, or can you go away from that? I mean, I know we're not changing the total laws of physics.
Well, exactly. And, it's like Field of Dreams, Honus Wagner, right? If you build it, they will come.
Right.
So you make it wider. What's going to happen? The ships are going to get bigger.
Ships are going to get bigger.
So we're still going to be doing the Texas chicken. And that's how we train our pilots, right? It's almost like a gun, right? You don't point a gun at someone. For a pilot, a very uncomfortable thing is to have a ship pointed at you as
absolutely.
Right?
Or when you were standing there as the junior third mate, which I was on a steamship going into those very same waters, and growing up not on the water in Houston, floating by, going, wait, you said go turn the rudder to port. I thought we're supposed to do, a port to port thing, and we're going to go starboard to starboard, and not realizing you had to do that. And that was, if you ever see video of it, I'm going to suggest, if you haven't seen video of it, I'm going to suggest my listeners do that. But you talk about all this. Let's get into the technology side of it, because you do allude to it. And I think this was something that we talked about before we got going on the digitalization. Yes, things like Ectus and other things have been around for quite a while. And certainly, pods had to get used to that. But the digitalization, what you're really seeing is the impact that comes in from the decarbonization. I'd like to hear kind of some of the challenges on how you and the pilots, not only at Houston, but, globally, are starting to deal with this.
Yeah, well, at first, like I said, when we move 20-something thousand transits a year, 10-something thousand ships coming through our waters, these issues usually hit us first. We're usually the first to find them. So as we started talking, amongst the American pilots, the Mississippi River guys, us, we were all seeing these depowering of engines, right? To meet these carbon cap emission regulations. And we knew we had to take immediate action. So that's what we did at the beginning of 2020. We stepped in and started having discussions about this, because there was confusion in port that pilots are more aimed at speed. That's not why we want power on an engine. We want power on an engine for control, for steering. When you're doing the Texas chicken, there's physics there that you need strong power to fight back against, right? And that's kind of the cornerstone of our waterway. Without the Texas chicken, is the Port of Houston, if it doesn't have that two-way traffic. Is there this investment of infrastructure and terminals here? So it's very important for us as pilots to have that power for maneuverability. So we worked very aggressively on the front end, and everyone was very receptive, from the American Pilot Association all the way up to IMO, the U.S. Coast Guard, flag states. Everyone understood our point, and we really had to clarify, because there was confusion amongst captains that if they overrode these engine power limiters, they would be in MARPOL violation, and they didn't want to do them. So what does a pilot do? What is the first mitigation tool if they don't have the power on an engine to control the vessel? It's a tractor escort tug, right? So did we do anything for carbon emissions by adding an additional carbon producer to this
additional, right? Yeah, 2 additional tugs. Oh, and then, by the way, who's going to pay for it? I mean, that's the whole other,
right.
Well, wait a minute.
That cost gets passed down, right, to the consumer.
Well, let's just, we can even stop before the consumer. That cost gets passed on to the charter, first to the owner and then to the charterer. And then charter's going to say, well, wait a minute. I can see these arguments taking place in my head. This is where I spent a lot of my time. Well, wait a minute, Mr. Owner. You've never had to take 2 ships to an extra tug, or tug, 2 hours longer before. What was the problem here? And it's like, well, no, I had to because of this. So because of these regulations, by the way, that you're making me commit to.
Right. And how many
it's your problem, Mr.
I mean, we're moving anywhere from 55 to 60 ships a day in Houston. We've got 20 tugboats. We run a very efficient operation, and there's not a lot
of coordination.
Right. So if I have to assign a tug to a 6-hour transit, I'm slowing the whole supply chain down. And during COVID, we saw how that affected us. So everyone was very receptive to the conversation on the front end. The beginning of 2024, Coast Guard DC released a policy that clearly stated this is not a MARPOL violation to turn these systems off in port. Our local Coast Guard captain of the port gave us an MSIB that gave clear direction. And our concern was, if your maneuvering poster states this, and these are your turning circles, and this is what we're basing the control in your vessel of, if you haven't gone and reassessed that with the EPL engaged, we don't know what we're getting. And we were seeing bulk ships reduced to like 33% of their original design, right? So
Right.
it was a great concern, but we moved quick. We worked hard. Everyone was in support. All the pilot associations came together. I mean, I saw reports out of Korean pilot associations all across the United States. And I think we're moving in the right direction on understanding that, hey, in the middle of the ocean, this makes perfect sense. When we're in port, we don't want to risk a greater environmental accident by not having the power to maneuver.
And to me, it's this whole intersection. And typically we talk about it in other ways on this podcast. Some almost theoretical, but the intersection of decarbonization and digitalization, right? Because you guys are dealing with the digital side of it, whether it's controls or the output or saying, hey, we have to be able to do this to comply with a decarbonization. But then there's a practical end of it, which is, well, wait a minute, all these things that we have judged ships on in the past now have changed. And how do we deal with this? So it sounds pretty interesting. And talking about digitalization, so we're talking about on the engine side and on the bridge side, things have been pretty consistent. But what about from what you do as a pilot? How have you guys handled kind of the march towards digitalization, especially giving, like you said, almost 100 pilots, so 90, would you say 95, 96 pilots in total? How do you handle, let's say, the difference in experience levels, the difference in kind of, when they came on as a pilot in kind of trying to upgrade what you do to be more digital savvy, and you make maybe not better decisions on the water, but planning decisions?
Well, fortunately for me, there were a lot of smart people here before I even showed up, right? And they made a lot of great decisions to set us up for success, right? And then you kind of wake up one day and you realize, yeah, we're a pilot association, but we're almost a technology company too, right? So when you're talking about the capacity of vessels we move, the amount of pilots we manage, the amount of customers we interact with, there has to be like a lot of back channel support to make all that work, right? So in the 90s, as the Port of Houston was booming, there were some pilots here that realized, well, there wasn't like an off-the-shelf pilot dispatch product, right? You see them now, and there's more and more of them coming along and more companies seeing a need for this and basing them. But we actually went out and developed our own software systems that run from anywhere. They start in dispatch with taking orders, and they go through our billing system to where it feeds our billing. And then we feed out data from that to our port bureau that, Port Bureau members can have ship statistics and trend data. You realize, oh my gosh, we're a technology company. We have to be concerned about servers and cybersecurity because the information we sit on is very important. We sit on a lot of trend data that people would want to have.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So in the 90s, we set up this system we call PLS, which is our pilot dispatching system. And it's great because we can adapt it to our needs. So like, as these carbon issues came up with these questions, we changed our format where a dispatcher can't put an order in without collecting some basic engine information on the ship. So if we need to take steps to mitigate that ship before it comes in, if it needs a tractor escort because the power's been reduced, like it now flows. And then it collects all that data and we can print reports and we can go to our captain of the port and we can say, look, we've been very successful with how we've mitigated these EPLs, because we can look at the trend over a year of like, at first they don't want to turn them off. Now everyone turns them off for us as they come. And then on the other side, that's one IT department, and we have an in-house IT that supports all of that. And then our pilots carry their own portable navigation, and it's all standardized equipment. Everyone gets issued the same equipment, trained on the same equipment. We're stepping on a different ship every day, right? Our focus as we step on that ship is the maneuverability of the ship, right? I don't have time to learn their ECDIS and how they have their ECDIS set up and the alarms they have set up. Most pilots will actually tell you ECDIS alarms are a pester, right? Because these alarms constantly going off in the background for CPA. Well, you're going to have tight CPAs when you're in port passing vessels by hundreds of feet.
Yeah, right? You would think so. Yeah.
So we don't have time to get on and learn their ECDIS and their navigation software equipment. So we carry kind of, it's called bowdage, and it's custom tailored to us. We make changes and we adjust it as we go. And we've got 3 or 4 pilots that kind of sit on a committee that give input to that software, and they listen to the greater group of, hey, how can we do this better? So like one of the really cool things we're working on as the Coast Guard kind of shifts their light list information and their, when lights go down is all going to be more digitalized. We'll now have the ability next year when a pilot notices like a range light, they'll be able to click on that range light, report that range light out, and then it'll consistently collect data. And then at a certain point, like we'll know, hey, that's a solar range light. It just hasn't been charged within a couple of days. But they'll be able to collect this data, recognize it, and then pass it straight to the Coast Guard, as opposed to a pilot shooting me a text, hey, will you tell the Coast Guard this range light's been out forever? And we'll be able to kind of track trends and see where issues are.
Right.
So we have a lot of navies in Houston.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I interviewed a Coast Guard Admiral John Mauger. This was probably about 2 years ago. And he talked about the initial beginning of that Coast Guard. The Coast Guard's focused on digitalization of everything. And the interesting thing that he pointed out, he said they're going to come up in the first 2 years with more data than since the Coast Guard has been in existence since 1700s. We all know the story with Alexander Hamilton and all that other stuff since Hamilton, right? That they'll be able to produce more data in the first 2 years. And it's just, he said it's everything. It's everything from, boating incidents to aids to navigation to dredging to offshore incidents with drugs and stuff like that. All these different things they can now digitalize, and they'll have more of it. And it's pretty amazing to hear that what you're doing is going to be basically a part of that greater digital effort by the U.S. Coast Guard.
As all of us, Maritime, Coast Guard, we're all running short on labor to make that a more efficient process, right? Because if we have a pilot report a light out that's a solar light that just hasn't gotten its charge, and then we now have to, by federal requirement, dispatch a boat crew to go check the light, and it turns out it just hasn't been charged in a few days. If we can build it out where, hey, it needs multiple reporting points before it actually gets passed along to them, so there's like that check system, we can be more efficient, but we can also track other than going back through my text and being like, hey, I get a lot of complaints about this light, we'll be able to build trends and kind of understand where our issues are.
And then be able to say, oh, well, the clouds are, the fog's supposed to roll out by, a few days time. So let's see what the end of the week looks like for that light. If that light is going on, then we know it's because the fog rolled out and it's sunny again. I mean, that's the real simple
that
thing.
was like a great idea that those guys focused on that stuff kind of came up with and brought it to us and was like, what do you think of this? I'm like, this is awesome. This is the kind of technology we're at the point where we can pursue. It's not as sexy as talking about a ship navigating the ocean with no people on it, right? But it's practical, it's applicable, we can do it now and make a difference.
Everybody wants to talk about, I want to be a disruptor, but I don't know if I want my pilots to be disrupted. I haven't spent as much time as you, but I spent a fair time, not so much in Houston. I did a lot in Beaumont, Sabine River, Neches River, and going out to Corpus, Ranches Pass. I've spent enough time there knowing that, no, you want people to be focused on getting your ship to and from that berth as safely as possible.
Boring days are good days when you're a pilot.
What's that?
Boring days are good days when you're a pilot.
Boring day, yes, exactly. Yeah. You don't want any sort of thing. But the point, I guess, here is the fact that you could take something that is as mundane as a reporting an outlight or an off-station buoy or what have you, and report it with a click of a button and being that goal in the future without disturbing or you having to remember to go back through the texts you got. By the way, you got other texts from other people and a client's upset with a billing issue and you have to deal with all those sort of things.
Oh, I love time text with Apple, right? Because when the pilot gives me the complaint at 9:00 in the morning, I'm not sending the text out to the Coast Guard or at 9:00 at night. I can actually time text it for, 8:30 the next morning. So they're like, oh man, he's been a lot more respectful of our time recently.
Yeah. It's like the schedule said, man. The greatest thing is the schedule said. I this morning, we're recording this in a quiet time during the holidays. Yeah, I'd set up a lot of schedule sends for when the holiday period's over.
I'm like, our whole staff probably thinks like, she must be relaxing in the evenings now.
Yeah, no. We're just doing that. The other interesting thing, and that you and I spoke about in October down at your alma mater, Texas A&M Galveston, which is, by the way, a really great campus right in the heart of all the commercial stuff. It was such a cool place to be, was social media and how the maritime space, especially the pilots, how you guys and gals deal with that. I'm really curious, social media, we have a little bit of an issue in the maritime space globally of being being kind of sea blindness. People don't know how things work until things go bad, until, like we talked about, until you have supply issues, i.e. you don't get your toilet paper at Walmart, or until you see a ship sideways in the Suez Canal. How are you guys handling this? What's your approach, given that, if you look at Instagram, you see certain pilotage. I see you guys on there. I see San Francisco pilots and some others. How are you handling that with giving people some information, but at the same time, not to be oversharing as well?
Well, I think that's kind of like a generational thing, right? Because every industry has that bad side to be scared of the bad publicity, right? So, here at Houston, our slogan for like 100 years was the silent servants of progress. And I think that kind of reflects like the maritime industry, sailors, like we're just kind of like head down, get the work done. We don't need a lot of credit for it and go home proud. I mean, when you're on a ship, you don't have people to call you. You have to get the work done. There's no like glory in that, right? But I think, we needed an opportunity. Like I said earlier, a boring day for a pilot is a good day. Well, what I see as boring, other people look at and see as a pretty exciting and neat thing to watch, right? So to share that message and let them see and understand how important a port is, how vital pilots are to moving the vessels through the port is important. And we've always approached social media from kind of just like sharing who the pilots are and the impact of the port is, right? We don't use it to spread news or information. Really, we might pass along statistics about the port that show its value, but it's just to give you kind of a glimpse. In 2002, we started our own 501c3 that the pilots fully fund, right? We don't take any outside donations, and we've given $1 million away in scholarships, right? But for this generation, the way to get them to understand what's going on behind the curtain, or as we say, behind the gates, right? Because when me and you were working on ships, it's kind of easy to get up next to them. Now it's like they're buried back behind security. So to give them that view is really social media and our time lapse videos. That's where we really get the most traction in our metrics.
Yeah, and ones that I know that I look at, I always love looking at those, whether it's locally, and I follow somebody who's up on one of the rivers in England, I forgot which one, and the pilot kind of goes in, and you're literally, it is not like Houston. They're very small dry bulk ships, and small narrow ships, and they're going through, and it's just the most fascinating. Even though I've done that, but I haven't done that thing. I've done other things.
Watching a long bulkers on the Great Lakes turn in high rivers. I mean, it's
going through the Detroit River. I think there's a Detroit River time lapse on one of the bridges, and you can see the ships going in. And they're all their own pilots, I believe, up there. They're all kind of they do their own pilotage. That is just amazing stuff. It's just amazing.
The thing I didn't even realize until I got in this position, I started interacting more with kind of the outside the maritime world. The most dangerous part people view our job as is getting on the ship, right? Climbing the pilot.
Yeah.
Right. That's the scary part. To us, it's pretty routine. There's incidents that occur, and it is dangerous.
Yeah.
And we do work very hard on compliance and making sure pilot ladders are properly rigged. We're working through our harbor safety group right now on a group to make sure ships have safe access at the dock. But that's really what people key in. Wait a minute, you climb up the side of the ship. It's like either you climb up or you come down on a wire from a helicopter. Those are kind of your options.
Yeah.
We've been doing this a long time, so That's,
There's those,
you've got it tuned in at this point.
But you're right, though. It's something as elemental as what we kind of regarded, or the industry regards as a very simple going up a pilot ladder, and then a pilot ladder to an accommodation ladder on some of the
Right.
with the higher freeboard. To some people see that's the most difficult thing, but they don't realize, you have to dock the ship, and you have, current going one way, wind blowing another, and then dealing with the aforementioned issues of, the engine isn't as powered as it should be. And that could get a little bit hair raising if you're not fully aware of it and planning for it. Because that's what I found with the pilots. It's all about planning. It's not where it's where you are in that individual minute, but then it's where am I going to be at the next buoy, and then at the turn,
Well,
and then.
And before the pilot even gets on that vessel, there's a lot of work that goes on in the background to ensure that that transit is safe and has the proper mitigations in place. We have our own simulator here in Houston. The Houston pilots do. And what we've done is we worked a deal out with a local junior college where they were able to start a maritime program to kind of meet local industry needs. But the simulator supplements the funding to have the maritime program, right? But it also gives us the ability, when someone wants to make a change to a dock or add a dock, or Project 11, we did all our simulations in there to get the maximum vessel size. So we've got a simulator 20 minutes from our office, and that investment has paid huge dividends for us.
Right. And that's the San Jacinto College, right? Is that the
right.
The
local junior college has a maritime program, and that simulator, it's a 3-bridge simulator, so we can literally have a ship's bridge and 2 tugs to do a full docking.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. No, that's definitely progressive. And you mentioned your scholarship fund as probably being part of that. When you go out and you talk to folks and they understand from the social media point of view, maybe a little bit about maritime, and they say to you, Captain Glass, why should I be in the maritime space? Whether it's being a pilot, a tug captain, or people that you meet along the way, like myself and others who are doing different things, maybe had some sailing and then wandered into different things. What do you talk to the folks, whether it's at San Jacinto College, at your alma mater, A&M, or just, in the industry who are interested in maritime? What do you kind of tell them?
Well, I always tell them it's a unique career, right? It's different, and it's not for everyone. Right? You're going to miss a lot of stuff, but it's also a really fascinating career, and you're going to get to have experiences that most people will never have. Right? You went to sea. There's nothing like a beautiful night when the sea's flat, calm, and you can see all the stars. I mean, on the contrary side, 30-foot rolling swells on the West Coast is a little tough, but it's a unique career, and I really think it's a working career, right? Like if you want to go for it and you want to work hard, like you can be anything, right? And it's not just pilot. It could be cargo broker. It could be running a tug company. Like there's so many opportunities. It's an amazing community. Like we met at the Nautical Institute in Galveston, but it's this great maritime community. I'll tell you, there's a local high school and the CTE program, and they have a maritime program, right? And the teacher was telling us when the middle school family comes through to like evaluate what they want to do, most of them don't understand maritime. And they kind of lean into what they know, whether it be welding or cosmetology or food services. And he said, I'm just here by myself trying to convince these families that this is a great career. So we worked with San Jacinto, A&M, the local tug company, a couple pilots, a great organization called Women Offshore that's based here.
Yeah, the good podcast too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And we worked together and we put all those people in the middle school family night when they came through, and they were all able to help the teacher talk about the maritime industry. And the first time ever, we maxed out, he gets like 16 people a class, right? And he got, for the first time ever, 16 people. So I think when you educate them about it, they're fascinated by it and they love the idea of it. And I always tell them, hey, it's a great job because you don't have to wear a tie to work and you don't have to sit in an office. And then look at where I've ended up now, right? I'm wearing a tie, sitting in an office.
Sitting in an office. And then, I always tell people, they say, well, how'd you get into maritime? And, a lot of guys, and you probably run across this too, Captain Glass, someone's dad, someone's uncle. Now as you get we get a little bit more someone's mom, someone's aunt, but before when I was starting out, there was a lot less women. And, obviously you see the impact of women, it's going to increase on those sort of conversations, which is really important. But for me, there was nobody in my family. I went to a college fair night. SUNY Maritime was there. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go check this out. Turned out SUNY Maritime was in the Bronx, about 20 minutes away from where my dad grew up. He thought it was a Coast Guard base. He had no idea what it was about. We went there and it was like, listen, you get to go on the ship. You could, have an office job, have a desk job or a sailing job or both. 100% job placement. You're probably never going to be out of work. Even if you are, it's going to be short-lived. And you have this potential for this network that can be as small as you want, or it could be the world and anywhere in between. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And I think that when people kind of hear it put into that way, and of course, you have the training ship there, and like you have at M, and I know you guys are getting a new ship. We got a new ship. I think Mass just got their new ship. You see all this new technology and the money that's being put in and updating some of the facilities. So you go, wow, this is a real part of the industry. And then you talk about having $1 trillion industry or the multi-billion-dollar impact that the pilots make and all the different parts, whether it's the tug companies, the dock workers. I mean, it just doesn't stop. And I think that that's what was the appeal to me and to a lot of other folks.
Yeah, I came from a maritime family. My father didn't. My father just by chance worked his way onto the tugs. And, I came from maritime, so I grew up around it. It's what I knew I wanted to be. So, but that's where, when we talk about workforce development and shortage of manpower, that's where like these tools like social media, I think, come in very helpful in educating the opportunities that are out there.
That's right. And I think to understand that it's not just for, men and, one type of person or another, like, no, you could do a lot of different things, women, men, all sorts of social economic background. Everybody's in the boat, so to speak. And it's a really great opportunity. It's kind of one of the few ones that I think that you could really kind of make, from nothing, you can make a lot, I think, whether it's not just money, but like to kind of have a really good existence and being a contributing member to society, I think.
Right. And hard work gets you there, right? Like showing up, being present and putting your best foot forward. And, it's a small industry. So treating people like you want to be treated, I mean, the possibilities are endless.
And finally, when you do travel and you go visit other pilot organizations, what are you reading besides, diagrams of ships that, get powered down and what the new turning radius is? Or what are you reading these days? Anything interesting on the bookshelf or you chuck into your bag with you?
Well, I read a lot of email. So I'm not going to sound very scholarly here. If you're looking for me to give you like a good biography or a good,
that's all right. A good management book or something. I don't know.
I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
And my 2-year-old, she's really getting into bringing me books in the evening and reading. So my consistent food is actually Goodnight Farm.
Goodnight Farm, okay.
And then after they go to sleep, I kind of get back to email. My position here right now, it's kind of a temporary position where we, 95 pilots will kind of take our turns rolling in and out. So there's a lot of ground to cover right now. We're a big port and there's a lot of people's needs to be met. I'm really focused on that right now. When I was actively piloting, I did carry a Kindle in my bag with me. It was like the best tool for a ship that took a long time to tie up because I wouldn't lose my patience as they I'd sit down and read a book and relax. But right now it's mostly email. It's
and Goodnight Moon or Goodnight Farm. Gotcha.
Goodnight Farm. We've got it down by memory right now.
So. I've been there. My kids are a little older, but I know exactly where you're coming from.
Kind of the best part of the day. It's an easy read too, right?
There you go. Now I can joke around about you. Now this is where, like, if we were at a bar, I could joke around about you Texas A&M guys, but we'll leave that for another time.
You totally can. You totally can. Like I said, I'm not proving myself as a Rhodes Scholar right now.
I'll save that for the King's Pointers. And I know that's a very much an alumni academy joke, but we'll save that for them whenever I have them back on. So Captain Glass, thank you for coming on the podcast. I surely do appreciate it.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to visit with you.
Absolutely.